Comfort and Joy, a Bad Dog Book Short by M. Andrew Rudder. Comfort and Joy is a short story featuring characters from the novel The Shadows That Linger by M. Andrew Rudder. The full novel can be purchased at baddogbooks.com. Aziz Jobrani understood Christmas trees were a real thing. They were in so many movies that Suleiman enjoyed, but he'd never seen one in person before. Well, the petite fennec fox assumed what he was staring at was a Christmas tree. As far as he could tell, it was just a giant evergreen tree, one in a long line of them, with other families and couples walking between them despite the several inches of snow on the ground. "What am I supposed to be looking for?" the fennec fox asked. His superpowers might give him some ability to control his body temperature, but it was still cold, leaving him bundled up in 3 coats and a scarf. Fashionable coats and scarves, mind, but he felt twice his size. He could barely feel the pressure of the arm around his shoulders. "We're looking for the perfect tree," Suleiman said beside him, his Iranian accent somewhat less noticeable than Aziz's thicker one. The older red fox stood only a few inches taller than him, but just felt more dignified thanks to his elegant trench coat, ascot scarf, and seeming immunity to the chill in the air or the snow under their feet. "Why do we need a Christmas tree?" Aziz whispered, turning his muzzle so hopefully the family of jinnits nearby did not hear him. "We're both Muslim." "There is nothing Christian about American Christmas," Suleiman retorted, though the smaller fox could see the corners of his mouth twitch. "You told me that you had never celebrated Christmas, so we will have the full tradition, the tree, the presents, the movies about understanding the meaning of Christmas, Santa Claus and Coca-Cola, everything." A gentle smile curved down his muzzle, and Suleiman's arm moved down so his gloved paw could grasp Aziz's own. Suleiman always wore stylish leather gloves as a barrier for his psychic powers, but at least during this season it wasn't considered eccentric by people around him unaware of his powers. "Why are the trees so big?" the fennec fox asked. "I don't think it will fit in the penthouse." "Oh, this is for the Medina estate. I will decorate the penthouse, of course," Suleiman said, as though sensing Aziz's next statement. He never intentionally read the young fox's mind. He added, "And yes, I'll be decorating. Not Francis. He has enough to do this time of year." Francis was an elderly British coyote who served as Suleiman's butler, and made sure his home life remained in order while Suleiman focused on work and Aziz. "What do you want me to do?" Aziz asked. His large ears flicked as snowflakes touched them. "Enjoy the season, little fox," Suleiman responded, and leaned over to kiss a snowflake from his fur. Aziz's communicator buzzed between them, which made the fennec fox jump, but after glancing around them to make sure no one could overhear, he reached under his sleeve, popped out the earpiece, and slapped it into his ear. "Prepare for teleportation," Zonrad said on the other end of the line. Without anywhere else to go, Aziz slipped in between the branches of one of the larger trees. Hopefully no one saw his boots disappear. It would be a difficult thing for Suleiman to explain, unless his charisma charmed away any probing questions. After a moment of blackness and being pulled in all directions, the petite fox reappeared in the teleporter at the Protector's base, clean metal and machines all around him instead of Christmas trees. Zonrad, a pine marten even smaller than him, wore her normal work overalls and a work shirt underneath them, though she'd also donned a Christmas hat. "I'm sorry for pulling you away from Suleiman, but there is an emergency in Turkey that requires your attention," she said without looking up from the controls. She was originally from Germany, but her accent only slipped out when she was distracted. "It's okay. We were just looking at Christmas trees," Aziz said as he started to unbutton his topmost jacket. "For the Madani Industries building?" she asked. "For the house. He wants to put one up." Her fingers paused on the controls, but then she nodded. "Ah, he wants to show you American Christmas. Very fun." Aziz tried not to blush any further as he tossed his jacket onto a nearby coat rack they'd retrieved from a storage room a few days prior. It took a few layers to reach his white and green superhero tights, and then Zonrad was ready with a duffel bag that held his cape, white gloves, and visor. With everything exchanged, he was Pariah, a member of the Protectors, ready to go where he was needed. Superpowers had begun to appear 5 years ago, and it did not take long for a superhero team, a team of supervillains, and multiple government organizations to crop up as a result of them. It was a new world, with people manifesting godlike strength, super speed, elemental control, or psychic abilities seemingly every day. Some might never notice, and others might never want anyone to know about their new powers, but no matter who it was or where they were from, Pariah would be there to help. "When mission is complete, make sure to stop by Madani Industries building in Seattle," Zonrad suggested. "I was there this morning. The lobby is very pretty." "Okay," he said with a nod, and felt the teleporter pull him again. Suleiman wouldn't mind him stopping by the actual office, right? He mostly entered through the roof to gain access to the penthouse, so he hadn't been in the building's main lobby in over a week. He rematerialized in a brisk crosswind, which left him tumbling through the air for a few seconds before he reoriented, hovering a few hundred yards above the ground. It was even colder here than outside Seattle, but he let flecks of white fire stream from him as he adapted to the cutting wind against his spandex. The software in his visor synced to the protector's satellites, and now showed his current GPS coordinates. Once he actually focused on the ground below him, he could see a few bombed-out buildings, dozens of trucks and other vehicles that had been overturned, and either Border Patrol or the military pouring from one building. A moment later, the windows exploded outward, and a fiery streak shot out of a destroyed doorway, which told him they faced Firestarter. A moment later, lightning bolts and a larger person flew out a window, telling Pariah Thunderwolf had been sent in ahead of him. "Seems to be random acts of violence," Zonrod said through his earpiece. "She's not like that," he whispered. Firestarter might enjoy a little chaos during her crime sprees, but she didn't destroy things without purpose. While he descended, he activated his superpowered vision, focusing on shining signals of lives that had begun to fade. He started with a family whose car had been overturned during the attack. As white flames poured from his paws and healed both minor and major injuries, he tried to ignore the rushing back and forth of Firestarter and Thunderwolf battling it out. "Just relax," he whispered to the next victim, an Iranian police officer. The jackal was panicking, so Pariah lowered his heart rate and adrenaline while repairing his burned skin and fur, forcing his body out of shock, even if he could not calm his thoughts. While he didn't like coming back to Iran, his duty was to save people where he could. As he moved to a third flickering life sign, Firestarter rushed past him, the force of her movement slamming him into the side of a trailer. He yelped as he impacted forehead first into unforgiving metal. His visor cracked and the screen switched to static, then gave up entirely. It only took a few seconds of concentration to power through the searing pain, heal his own forehead, and double-check to make sure he didn't have a concussion. He scrambled under the truck he'd impacted, his muzzle filled with dust, and even as he coughed, his communicator beeped. Before Zonrod chimed in, he pressed one of the buttons. "My visor broke," he shouted over the chaos around him. "Where is your mask? I tell you to keep it on you in case this happens," she responded. "I don't know," he responded. Honestly, since he hadn't worn it in months, he didn't even know if it had made the journey from living at the base to living in Seattle with Suleiman. The small fox rolled over so he was flat on his back. Life signs blazed in his superpowered vision, which made him wonder, why was a tractor trailer filled with people? If they were some farm animal, they'd be physically bigger, and there would have been vents or something on the sides instead of solid metal. And why was this seemingly the only vehicle not overturned? "Oh," he whispered. "Oh, what? What has happened?" Zonrod asked. "Nothing," he responded. "I need to call Suleiman." Once the Pine Marten disconnected, he did just that. Suleiman had been a supervillain barely 6 months before, and had technically been Firestarter's boss. He might be reformed, but he still knew more about her than probably anyone else. "Where did you end up, little fox?" Suleiman asked as soon as the call connected. "My GPS says I'm on the border between Iran and Turkey. Firestarter blew up the border crossing. Why would she do that?" Pariah asked. "She is not one for random acts of violence," he confirmed. "Though perhaps it is a distraction? Is she still there?" He could feel a few more life signs beginning to fade. He needed to get moving soon. "She's fighting Thunderwolf," he explained, and quickly ran through what had been destroyed or exploded. When he mentioned the truck of people above him, Suleiman interrupted. "There were several occasions where we helped move people seeking political asylum or other refugees. That might be her motivation. Can you get the truck moving?" He blinked. There were no life signs in the cab, but he barely knew how to drive a car, let alone a big rig. "Remember, no matter how fast she is, she cannot fly," the red fox half a world away coughed. "And do remember we have the company Christmas party tonight in 2 hours." Pariah had completely forgotten. "I do understand if you are late, of course." "I love you," Pariah whispered as he heard another explosion in the distance. "I love you too," Suleiman replied. He ended the call, crawled to the edge of the shadow, and dialed Zonrod one more time. "Teleport Genesis here. Tell him to pick up the truck I'm in. It's full of refugees." "You know the procedures," Zonrod said. He scooted backward, and after making sure no one stood near him, he climbed up, yanked off a shot-through padlock on the trailer's back door, slipped into the trailer, and shut the door behind him. It took a few moments for his eyes to adjust, but he remained facing the steel. He could feel dozens of people behind him, hear little noises, whispers in Persian, and the combined sense of dozens of people filled his nose. Without a mask, he couldn't risk exposure, especially back in Iran. "Tell me you're seeking official asylum through the Protectors," Pariah stated in Persian. He heard a grunt outside the door, and the trailer shifted, then yanked up, probably off the tractor, then a moment of weightlessness as people behind him screamed in alarm. A cub began to cry. "We want asylum," a scared Persian voice told him. "Thank you," he said, and he pushed the door against the crosswind. The truck had been lifted 50 feet in the air, and as he swept under it, he found Genesis, a lion whose impressive muscles rippled beneath nothing. He flew without his tights, a bright star in a storm, seemingly impervious to cold and the distractions he surely must be causing. Besides fur and a flowing mane, the only scrap of cloth on him being Pariah's mask, held between two fingers as he lifted the trailer with one upraised arm. Heroism does not wait for laundry, the lion called over. He held up the fox's domino mask, and even after Pariah was suitably covered, he couldn't pull his eyes away. Genesis said something, probably every other part of the lion's body prevented him from hearing. "Pay attention," he growled, which shook Pariah out of his stupor. "Refugees are still in the trailer?" They asked for asylum," he sputtered. "Then I will keep them up here," the lion stated. He still looked irritated, and it took most of Pariah's willpower not to look down again. "I think their fire starter is here," Pariah said as he scanned the area. A few people still needed medical attention, but emergency personnel were already on the scene. What they needed to do now was stop any further explosions. "Understood," the lion said. "You will call your husband to stop her?" "No, and he's my boyfriend," Pariah corrected. The topic had been broached a few times, especially after more harrowing missions, but never with true intent behind it. Suleiman seemed mostly curious if the Finnick Fox had considered it, and if they wanted to make their relationship more official in the eyes of the law, though he knew Suleiman's secretary had jokingly called him Mrs. Madani on more than one occasion, and one business magazine had listed him as Suleiman Madani's much younger partner. Pariah flew back down to ground level, hovering a few inches above an impact crater. Firestarter sped out of a nearby building. Thin trails of flame behind her melted what little snow peppered the ground. She skidded to a stop in front of him and glared. She was a doll in a skin-tight suit to complement her immense speed, with a professional cyclist helmet and a stylized flame emblazoned on her chest. In the time since he'd become a superhero, he still had no idea the full extent of the doll's power. For the most part, she sped around, stole things, and sometimes used her momentum to throw the weaker superheroes into buildings. But Suleiman had never explained the full extent of her powers to him. Since Suleiman's retirement as a villain, she had become the most successful supervillain on the planet. But thanks to both her speed and normal lack of indiscriminate casualties, governments did not consider her a high priority. He heard a crack behind him as Thunderwolf landed, his fur standing on end from the static electricity. Lightning crackled up and down his arms, and he seemed ready to throw bolts at her as soon as Pariah was out of range again. In comparison to Firestarter and Pariah's more conservative outfits, Thunderwolf wore little more than a pair of leather pants and a heavy chain, if Pariah didn't count his facial piercings and shockingly blue mohawk. "We'll give them asylum," Pariah said. Firestarter broke into a wide smile. "That easy, huh?" she asked. "We'll protect them," the Finnick Fox assured her. She glanced between the two superheroes a few feet from her, then up at the new Genesis. "I think that image is a good enough present from you guys," she muttered. "Merry Christmas," he whispered, and saw one of her ears flick. "Merry Christmas to you too," she said, casually saluted, and disappeared in a blur of motion. Thunderwolf took a step forward, but then they both watched her disappear over the horizon. "So, she escapes again," he growled. He was flamboyantly Russian and reveled in both his original culture and drank enough for the whole team. "It's Christmas. We can let her go this time," Pariah said, which caused the wolf to chuckle. "Last person on team I would expect that from. You're normally such a good person. Hero, now you let criminal go?" He turned around and faced the pierced and dyed wolf. "What's not heroic about giving someone another chance?" With a shrug, Thunderwolf took off toward the gathered military personnel, leaving Pariah to float back up to the trailer. Once he nodded at the still naked Genesis, Pariah tried not to blush too hard as he slipped back through the unlocked door. Now that the danger had passed, he concentrated and let white fire gently lap at his fingers. He might not have magic, but the glow that accompanied his healing did illuminate the cramped space. Over 100 foxes, wolves, leopards, rats, and mice crowded in between stacked mattresses, cardboard boxes, and sheets pinned in place to give some of them privacy. The mix of personal sense, magnified by a few days without bathing, filled Pariah's nose, soaked through with so much fear. No one present looked older than Pariah, and a few could barely be considered teenagers. Some clutched cubs close to their chests. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, and let the white fire that accompanied his powers flow over him, creating a beacon for them. These people were young, scared, and some showed tattered ears or long broken tails. He could help them, even if it took more concentration and drained him further than stitching up a fresh wound. The malnutrition or dehydration he sensed could be solved soon, and he heard gasps and whimpers as past harms disappeared. As his power retreated, he braced a paw on the door and waited for his knees to stop shaking and his vision to clear. Someone knocked on the metal behind him. He jumped along with everyone else. "I'm opening a portal," White Magus shouted through the door. He was an Arctic fox, and assuming he was dressed like he normally did when he flew around, he'd be in a magician's tuxedo and his fur glittering with iridescent sparkles. "Genesis told me they said the magic words. We're bringing them straight to the United States, if that's cool." "Is that White Magus?" a clouded leopard called out in English. "Sure is," the Arctic fox replied. "I'll have t-shirts when we land. I don't sign body parts." Despite all the fear he could smell, one of the red foxes close to him had such a relieved smile on her face that he had to smile back. Pariah had no idea when they went through the portal, or how long it took them to descend. Genesis remained as careful as possible, so when they touched the ground once again, his first indication of it was White Magus flinging open the doors, and the wide smile surrounded by rainbow fur was infectious, bolstered by shocked passerby staring at the open door and the lights of a massive Christmas tree behind him. "Landed in Rockefeller Center. Couldn't get the tree out of my head," White Magus said. "Genesis is back at the base. Let's get these guys and gals somewhere warm and safe." Pariah stepped aside and let the trail of refugees walk out into the puddles and slush, though none of them looked anything but grateful. Most stared in wonder at the Christmas tree. One of a pair of Fennec Fox teenagers even paused, turned, and pulled Aziz into a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered, clung to him a little tighter, and then ran back to step into White Magus's conjured sweaters and blankets. Just as he'd promised, he'd also had a small stack of rainbow tie-dyed shirt, complete with a cartoon of him on the chest, which he gleefully passed around to the refugees. He must have been doing a press event here when the emergency call went out. "Merry Christmas," he whispered, and heard his communicator buzz. "Everyone's safe?" Zonrod asked. "Yeah," Pariah said, let out a little sigh of relief. Whatever reasons they'd had to escape Iran, they were safe now, and had a brighter future. He couldn't think of a better present. It took a while to brief the NYPD about what had happened, make sure the next steps for asylum were started, and then teleport back to the base and change into civilian clothes. But Aziz did make it back to Seattle with a few minutes to spare before the start of the Madani Industries Christmas party. Zonrod had teleported him to the roof so he could enter through the penthouse on the top floor, though instead of going straight to the conference rooms in which the party was going to be taking place, he took the elevator down to the lobby first. Zonrod had been right. As soon as he stepped out of the elevator, the decorations entranced him. A 10-foot-tall Christmas tree spread gaily out across a large swath of the lobby, with chairs and couches moved both to accommodate it and allow guests to admire it. Though some traditional decorations adorned the branches, there were no electric lights, but tinsel and popcorn strings had been artfully draped. Dozens of unique baubles, charms, and handwritten prayers on paper slips had been hung from the innumerable branches. "The nicest Douglas fir money can buy," Suleiman said behind him, causing Aziz to squeak. The red fox gently took his paw and kissed him on the cheek. Suleiman still wore his thin leather gloves, but had changed into a custom-tailored suit. "Everything went well, I assume?" Suleiman asked. The trailer of Iranian refugees was on the news, as was a very new Genesis. "Pathfinder and I are going to help them find new places to live," Aziz replied, pointedly ignoring the second part of the red fox's statement. Suleiman kissed the side of Aziz's neck, which made both the Fennec fox shiver and suitably embarrassed him. Holding paws or being cute in public might be one thing, but he certainly didn't want to make out or become aroused in front of Suleiman's colleagues. "I wanted to see the tree before I went to the party," the Fennec fox whispered. Even now, with it near freezing outside, Suleiman looked dignified, a knitted scarf draped over his shoulders the only evidence of the cold. The gray around his muzzle and ears only added to his maturity, and when he noticed Aziz staring, he let his tail wag. "I hope you will enjoy tonight. Corporate Christmas parties are all part of the experience," the older fox said. "Part of being with you, or part of Christmas?" Aziz asked. "Both, I suppose," Suleiman said, and gave his paw a reassuring squeeze. "Now, let us head upstairs. I do have a surprise for you." Aziz let out a little whine, though it wasn't as though he was truly concerned, only that they'd instituted a one-present rule for Christmas, since Aziz could not reasonably lavish Suleiman in the same quantity or quality of presents that the billionaire CEO of a company that carried his name could, and passing out pre-Christmas presents would be just the kind of thing the Red Fox might do to violate the spirit of their agreement, if not actually break it. Aziz would also not put it past Suleiman to have purchased a house or a private island, for the both of them, to technically not break their agreement either. For Aziz's birthday several months ago, Suleiman had bought them a vacation home on the French Riviera after Aziz had insisted on no presents. A short trip in the elevator later, and they reached one of the highest floors in the office building. Crooning Christmas music hit his ears first, then the low buzz of chatter all around the large adjoining conference rooms. Some of the guests, encompassing dozens of species, turned to greet their boss, while others remained in jovial discussion with their coworkers. A few stayed in chairs along the edges, whether just observing or disconnected on their phones, but it certainly looked like everyone Aziz had ever seen working with Suleiman was here, many adorned with Santa hats. A jangle pulled his attention to his side, and there was Lance with his normal white fur and no longer in his white Magus suit, wearing the ugliest sweater Aziz had ever seen in plush reindeer antlers complete with bells on top of his head. "Merry Christmas," he said, and passed Aziz a wide flat box wrapped in candy cane patterned paper, a gold ribbon, and a little tag with his and Suleiman's name on it. "You told me not to get you a present," he replied, but smiled all the same. Suleiman sniffed, looked around, then looked down at the box. "Aziz, please smell that before you open it, if it contains what I think it does," he said. Aziz did just that, even if he felt a little silly doing so. Some sort of strong alcohol and chocolate filled his nose. "Oh, I don't drink," the Fennec Fox said. When he looked back up, it seemed he'd broken Lance's heart. "Crap," Lance muttered. "Why not give them to Francis?" Suleiman suggested. "I am sure he would appreciate chocolate liqueurs. He should be somewhere in this room." Lance still looked a little hurt, but shrugged, tore the tag off the box, and slipped back through the crowd. Aziz peeked around a small group of people in ties and Santa hats to watch him pass the box to the elderly coyote. Despite being so proper in English, he could see Francis stuttering and fumbling before shaking Lance's paw and nodding emphatically. Suleiman chuckled beside him. "Lance has now bound Francis tighter than any chain," he commented. "What do you mean?" Aziz asked. "Francis is British and does not have a gift to exchange. You will spend the next few days frantically searching for something that could mean as much as unsolicited kindness. He is probably concerned the roof will collapse on him at any moment." While they talked, they began to move deeper into the conference room. Canids, felines, and mustelids all turned to politely greet Suleiman, compliment the two of them on their outfits, or wish them Merry Christmas. Some stammered and switched to Happy Holidays, but Suleiman politely waved them off. "It does not bother me. I believe on the official records that this is listed as a holiday get-together, but I do understand most of those working in this office consider it a Christmas party, and I am certainly not immune to the charm of the holiday. The tree in the lobby should be an indication of that." That elicited a laugh from the worried bull, and Suleiman just smiled as the two of them continued into the party. Though chairs had been placed strategically around the room, only one of the massive oak conference tables remained, covered in trays of cookies, cakes, various pastries, appetizers, and bottles of soda and non-alcoholic cider. Suleiman reached for a Madeline and popped it into his muzzle, which caused Aziz to laugh when he looked past his boyfriend at an awestruck sandcat. "What?" he asked after he swallowed. Aziz silently pointed behind Suleiman to the sandcat, who wore a sensible suit and hijab. Her tail had puffed out in alarm at being noticed. "Is something the matter?" Suleiman asked, looking more bemused than angry. "I have just never seen you eat before, Mr. Madani," the sandcat said. "Were you under the assumption that I was some sort of automaton or demon?" he asked. "You give that impression," she said, but smiled. "Well, hopefully those images are suitably shattered," Suleiman said as he reached for a plate and began to pile it high. Aziz poured Coke into a wine glass. There was no alcohol on the table, and after Suleiman was pulled away by a European business associate, the small fox took a sip and turned to decide with whom he might make small talk. Francis and Lance were always options. It made him a little nervous that everyone here knew his name, but he didn't know many of them. Before he could slip away to wait for Suleiman to come back and be his social buoy, something bumped into his legs. He looked down at a sand kitten, probably 3 or 4, wearing a pair of felt reindeer antlers and a sweater decorated with a cartoon of Genesis. He tugged on Aziz's jacket. "I'm hungry," he stated, staring right up at Aziz with all the resolution of a soldier entering the front lines. "Oh, I'm sorry," the sandcat beside him said. She reached down to scoop him up, but the kitten slipped around Aziz's legs without letting go of his pants leg. "Our babysitter canceled at the last minute, and they hoped Yassir would behave." She glanced around, searching. "My husband should have Noor and Nassim." "It's all right," Aziz said, and swooped down and around to pick the kitten up, who stared at him the entire time as he reached eye level and now clung to his shoulder. "I'm hungry," he repeated, now seemingly trying to stare the Fennec Fox down. "Is it okay?" Aziz asked, his spare paw hovering over the table, and she nodded. He grabbed a green sugar cookie shaped like a star and passed it to the kitten, who immediately began to take wide bites out of it. Only after he polished off the first cookie did he look back at his mother. "If you need to socialize, I don't mind watching him," Aziz offered. Her tail puffed out again, but he just smiled. "It's really okay," he said, and wondered if it was more because he was a stranger or because he currently lived with her boss. With a little more fuss over her kitten's sweater and passing him a second cookie, she gave him one more wistful glance before turning to address a goat who had tapped her on the shoulder. "So, your name is Yasir?" Aziz asked. The kitten nodded in between nibbles on his second cookie. "Were you hungry, or did you just want a cookie?" "It's okay if you just wanted a cookie," the Fennec Fox asked. Yasir looked confounded for a moment, looked down at his second cookie, and then swallowed. "Mommy doesn't make cookies at home." "It's okay. I don't either," Aziz said, and picked up one of the oatmeal cookies. He wanted to avoid most of the heavier stuff, and it looked like the chicken and shrimp had been wrapped in bacon. The fox considered it might be safer to avoid anything that contained meat. For a while, Aziz just held Yasir and watched all sorts of people walk back and forth. Some were couples, though a few people did seem only to be here to be counted. A wolf that he thought might be a senator he'd seen on television kept dodging questions to come back for more food. Scott Pearson, the incendiary newscaster who had accused Pariah of being a terrorist during a broadcast earlier in the year, was also here, though luckily he didn't recognize the Fennec Fox outside of uniform. From the way he kept turning away from the crowd and reaching into his jacket, Aziz suspected he was slipping shots of something into his soda. However, almost everyone looked at the very least content, with perked ears and slowly wagging tails. "If I could steal your attention for a few minutes," Suleiman called out, and the room quieted down. The red fox had climbed up on a chair, dressed down to his dress shirt and tie, with Francis standing near him, holding his trench coat and scarf. "I appreciate everyone coming to the office tonight, since I am sure most of you have family or other obligations that can pull you away, even a week before Christmas. I am not Christian, I do not have children, so I can only assume how stressful this time of year is for all of you." That elicited a few chuckles, and he waited for them to quiet down before continuing. "Walking around and speaking directly to so many of you, some for the first time, it has come to my attention that many of you believe I am some stoic madman in charge of a billion-dollar company, or a robot designed only for conquest, despite my philanthropy and work in the developing world." A few people looked embarrassed, but Aziz just smiled at his boyfriend. This was all part of the show, he told himself, and though he didn't know where this might be going, he knew it would be entertaining. "So, on top of your Christmas bonuses, which I will address in just a few minutes, I have decided as an additional holiday bonus I will prove to all of you that I am as mortal and capable of embarrassing myself as the rest of you." With that, Francis reached under the table and held up a black acoustic guitar. "This never leaves this room," he warned, his stare intense, but his lips still curled into a wry smile. He turned one of the keys, gave it an experimental strum, and began to play. When Aziz found the guitar in one of Suleiman's closets last month, the older fox had said he played occasionally and had learned as a teenager, but wanted to make playing in front of the Fennec Fox a surprise. As the other Vulpine's fingers expertly moved across the strings, it seemed while Aziz had been out on missions late at night, the billionaire had been practicing. Now he was playing All I Want for Christmas Is You, and kept his eyes on Aziz. When the song finished and the mix of polite and enthusiastic clapping died down, he switched to Let It Snow, then segued perfectly into Walking in a Winter Wonderland. By the time he finished playing Please Come Home for Christmas, almost all of the applause sounded genuine. "Thank you for humoring," Suleiman said as he passed the guitar back down to Francis, who looked like he was trying not to praise Suleiman and therefore shatter his veneer of professional stoicism. "I am afraid I do not know many traditional carols, but that is what happens when you grow up in Iran." After tugging one of his gloves back tight against his fingers and letting the chatter quiet down again, Suleiman folded his paws behind his back. "Now, I would like to address the subject of Christmas bonuses," the Red Fox started. "As anyone who worked here last year knows, I am generous when it comes to corporate perks, and believe every employee both be invested in this company's future and be rewarded for said behavior. Since opening these offices, I have included paid vacation from before Christmas through the start of the new year and 1 month's bonus or pay for everyone, whether you have worked here a week or a year. This is a difficult environment in which to work, so just like last year, these offices will be closed starting today until January 2nd. That did elicit a few gasps. Aziz guessed some of the newer employees had expected to need to come in all through the holidays, on top of not expecting the incredible Christmas bonus. "However," he continued, which caused the room to go completely silent, "I will be adding something to that bonus, because I do sincerely wish all of my employees to succeed, and I find retaining capable employees is better than needing to find and retain lawyers, accountants, and professional office workers to my exacting standards." He swept out his arm to indicate a small group of ferrets who stood nearby, Each looked embarrassed to be singled out, but still resolutely proud. One of the advantages of working for a multinational conglomerate with an impressive human resources department is that I can find out what would truly help my employees more than simply arranging expensive gifts or bonus paychecks. Suleiman looked triumphant, as Aziz assumed he had in the old days when he'd helped destabilize nations as puppeteer. This was now his battlefield, and one he could conquer in a different way, even while the Finnick Fox bribed Yassir with another cookie so Aziz could hear every word. By tomorrow, every employee for the Madani Industries main offices, even those who chose not to attend this gathering, will find that their debts have been wiped clean. Every mortgage and car has been paid off, every medical bill wiped, every student loan evaporated. I have spent my own money doing this because I believe everyone deserves a fresh start, whether those debts were accidental or intentional. Everyone may go home with the knowledge that as of the new year, you will be debt-free, with your Christmas bonus to either purchase something truly great for your family or invest in your future. Silence practically reverberated around the room as Francis helped Suleiman take a few dignified steps down to the floor, and once he had donned his coat and scarf, the Red Fox swept through the shocked crowd. Once he reached Aziz, he locked eyes with Yassir, who stared back. "Fatima, if you would not mind," he said without breaking his gaze. She reappeared behind him and gently lifted Yassir from Aziz's grip. Suleiman then took Aziz's paw. "If you'll excuse me for a few moments," Suleiman stated, and Aziz gladly fled the party with him. Even without that Christmas bonus personally affecting him, the implications of it were mind-boggling. Suleiman had spent millions of his own money to fundamentally alter the lives of everyone who worked for him, in a way they would remember for the rest of their lives. Once they reached the elevator, Suleiman pressed the button for the lobby and then pulled Aziz into a private kiss as the door shut behind them. Aziz didn't open his eyes until the elevator dinged, but when he did, the two of them were greeted not by an empty lobby, but instead by a dole impatiently tapping one high-heeled shoe. "I don't have all the time in the world," she said. "I do need to get back to India before anyone notices I'm missing." She looked familiar, but Aziz couldn't quite put his finger on it. Then it clicked. She was Firestarter, a beat in a massive parka and jeans instead of her normal spandex and helmet. "What are you doing here?" Aziz asked, and stepped in between her and Suleiman. "I've got something to deliver. Thanks for taking care of my refugees, by the way. Top-notch work," she responded, which deflated him somewhat. If she wasn't here to cause trouble, he shouldn't start it. "You know, you could have just asked us to help you," Aziz said. "I would have helped." "And no one else would have," she countered. "Pathfinder and Zonrod would have wanted them to go through proper channels, which I might understand if everyone in that trailer weren't trying to escape being killed by their families. You saw them. They were mostly cubs and kids. They didn't have a few years for paperwork and background checks." "They're still going to have to do all that," Aziz said. "But now they can do it somewhere safe," Firestarter said. She held out what was in her paws, a resin planter occupied by a single Iranian tulip, red with gray accents and triangular petal edges. "Here is your Christmas present," she said, and let Aziz step aside so she could press it into Suleiman's paws, glaring until he gripped it and took it from her custody. "It's a new breed. Won't be on the market for a few more months. The company is calling it the Madani tulip." "How flattering," Suleiman muttered. "Apparently one of the botanists wanted to give it to you, but someone won't step foot in Iran ever again, so I offered to make sure it landed in your paws," she explained. The Finnick Fox understood why his boyfriend didn't want to be in any situation where the Iranian government might have authority over him. Both Aziz and Suleiman had been tortured by the Iranian government in an attempt to unlock supernatural abilities. They had succeeded, though in different ways. Aziz had escaped and become a superhero, while Suleiman's psychic powers allowed him to gain control of the facility, destroy it, and become a supervillain. "It does match you," Aziz piped in, which caused the other two to stare at him. "Well, it's the right colors, and it has really sharp edges, but it's still beautiful." That got Suleiman to smile, Firestarter to sigh, and Aziz to keep looking at the flower. It might not be the most traditional present, even if he wasn't entirely sure what that was, but the dole took the opportunity to speed through the otherwise empty lobby, paused to growl at the automatic doors, and was gone on a gust of wind before the Finnick Fox could say anything else. "It's really pretty," Aziz commented, and gently took the pot from his boyfriend's paws, who slipped an arm around his shoulders. "Yes, you are," he said, and kissed one of the Finnick Fox's ears. The next few days passed in something of a blur. Even if Suleiman did genuinely enjoy the season, the older fox had fallen in love with American Christmas immediately when he'd entered the country, and his house reflected that. He'd decorated the tree in tinsel and popcorn strings, and though there might not be an angel on the top, a Santa hat brought a different kind of festivity to the living room. Francis might have fretted about Suleiman doing all the decorating and shopping himself, but he did allow the elderly coyote to bake cookies, mince pies, and an eventual Christmas pudding. Francis had even promised a massive Christmas turkey on the holiday itself, since despite it being only the three of them, he said eating leftovers until New Year's Eve was all part of the tradition. On Christmas Eve, Suleiman cuddled up with and introduced the younger fox to A Christmas Carol, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and on Lance's insistence, Die Hard, which he did admit afterward had been quite enjoyable. By the time the third movie ended, the fennec fox had fallen asleep beside him, and rather than move him, got comfortable himself and dozed on the couch. It had only taken a few days of permanently living together for them to discover that neither generally had to sleep thanks to their respective powers, but there was a certain romantic charm to falling asleep and awakening beside one another. When Suleiman did actually wake up Christmas morning, he found Francis had already moved their presents under the tree, had tidied up somewhat by folding the Afghan Suleiman and tossed off in the middle of the night, and by the smell of it had started cooking breakfast and brewing coffee. When the red fox started to move, Aziz stirred beside him and sniffed, which caused his eyes to pop open. "It's Christmas," he whispered. "Merry Christmas," Suleiman whispered, and kissed him. Was all Aziz could say for a few moments before the older fox climbed off the couch, cracked his back, and shuffled into the bedroom. Despite having lived together for several months, they still tried not to step on each other's morning routines. One of them would shower, and then while they dressed, the other would take their place. This might not be a day where Suleiman necessarily needed to shrug into a $1,000 suit, but at the same time, he always wanted to look his best for Aziz, so he still dressed the part. At least he did not need to wear his gloves while in the house. Suleiman could not help but smile when he caught his first glance of what Aziz had chosen to wear today, probably just for him, one of Suleiman's pariah t-shirts. He'd bought a few, and the young fennec fox had been thoroughly embarrassed, even more so when the older fox had been caught by a tabloid wearing one outside a coffee shop. "Is this okay?" Aziz asked, tugging at the two long sleeves and hem. "Of course it is," Suleiman said, and pulled him close. "Breakfast is probably ready," Aziz said, turning his head so Suleiman would have to kiss the side of his neck instead of his lips. He certainly didn't mind. "Presents first, then breakfast. That is the routine," Suleiman responded. Aziz awarded him with a huff, but still walked back into the living room instead of the kitchen, his tail proudly hitched high and showing off the silk boxers Suleiman had bought him for when he didn't need to wear tights. "I thought we had a one-present rule," Aziz said, now that he was awake enough to see the small mountain of presents that had materialized under the tree. "I did only get you one present," the red fox answered. "There are also presents there from Francis, Lance, Catherine, and Alejandro, among others. I could not seriously deny them the Christmas spirit." "I feel like that's cheating," Aziz commented. "I do not play fair," Suleiman said, and lowered himself to the floor beside the tree. Aziz sat cross-legged beside him and reached for one present, wrapped in snowflake-patterned paper. He passed it to Suleiman. "I don't want to open the others until I give them their presents," Aziz stated, "but I'll open yours." He then folded back his ears for a moment before swallowing nervously. "You first." "I will not be disappointed in anything you get me," Suleiman said, and even after a playful nuzzle, the other fox still looked worried. Rather than continue to try and comfort him, Suleiman instead decided to solve the source of his anxiety and tore off the wrapping paper. Inside the plainclothes box were two items, a photo album and a photo frame. When the red fox gingerly opened the cover of the album, he found page after page of Aziz, or the two of them together. Some were more casual. Images and clippings from magazines filled some pages, while others looked like they'd been done by professional photographers. All the images were the same size, or had 2 or 4 set in the same dimensions on the single glossy page. "You said you wanted a picture of me for your office, but Francis told me you didn't like those digital picture frames," Aziz said, "so I figured you could pick your favorite, or swap them out whenever you wanted." "This is—" Suleiman started and heard his voice crack. He thought the Madani tulip, named for him, would be the most intimate and personal gift he'd ever be given, but Aziz had gone to such lengths just to give him a truly meaningful present. When the fennec fox's arms wrapped around his shoulders, he quickly returned the hug, hard enough to cause Aziz to squeak. "Open yours. I do not know if it can compare to this," Suleiman said, and watched the person he cared about most in the world retrieve a small box wrapped in gold paper. Once he tore it off, his eyes went wide. "You did say you needed a smartphone," Suleiman said, "though there is a surprise on it. If you check the music, it is already charged and set up." It took the fennec fox a few fumbled attempts to get there. Suleiman had gotten him the same make and model Lance used, so he'd be familiar with it, but when he did, Aziz looked puzzled. "These all say they're by you," the younger fox said. "You told me when you found the guitar that you'd always thought it was romantic to listen to someone play music for you, So, besides the times I will certainly play for you, I went ahead and recorded a few dozen songs I knew so you can listen to them whenever you wanted." Now it was Suleiman's turn to pull the younger fox into his arms, even as the happy tears started, and Aziz kept whispering that it was too much. The studio time had been expensive, but he had money to spare, and he'd wanted to make Aziz's first Christmas memorable. "There will be no one-present rule next year," Suleiman said as he nibbled on Aziz's ears, "though I do not know if I will be able to outdo the thoughtfulness of your present, or elicit this sort of reaction from you again, even with 100 presents." Aziz sniffed a few times and then whispered, "I'm sure you'll think of something," into Suleiman's chest. Suleiman thought of the things he had bought in the month before Aziz had asked for the one-present rule, and where they had been hidden in the house, some in spare drawers, some in plain sight, and some in Madani industry offices. He could give Aziz most of them over the next few weeks with no fanfare or special occasion necessary. Well, most of them, he thought. Some gifts required a certain amount of ceremony. When the younger fox stood up and walked into the bedroom to blow his nose, Suleiman climbed to his feet and slipped his paws into his dress coat pockets. For just a few moments he ran his fingers along the 2 plain steel wedding rings that had rested in his coat pocket for over a month, only waiting for him to be brave enough to ask a very important question. Not right now, he told himself, but soon. "Sir," Francis said, pulling him from his thoughts, "breakfast is ready." "Thank you," Suleiman said, and pulled his paw from his pocket. Aziz walked back into the living room, and the older fox pulled him into a tight embrace.